Well, I did go to the Grand National. We were very lucky with one thing. The weather was much better than it had been the previous 2 days. And I was in the centre of the parade ring with some of the owners, watching the horses going round ahead of the Grand National. And then something happened. Protesters started climbing fences and going onto the course. I noticed that as the horses went round repeatedly, that two or three of them got really, really hot, really sweaty, and were certainly getting pretty foamy at the mouth. They weren't looking happy with what went on. They then were rushed out. In the end, 12, 13 minutes late, there was a false start because another protester got on the course. I'm no expert. I'm no expert when it comes to horses, but it seemed to me that general chaos and unnecessary level of stress caused by animal rising perhaps directly led to some of the things that happened in the first few minutes of the race. Well, joining me now is trainer Sandy Thomson, trainer of the horse Hill 16, who died at the Grand National. And Sandy joins me from Kelso. Sandy, good evening. Very sorry to see what happened at that first fence. Just tell us a little bit about Hill 16's history as a jumper.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on. Hill 16, we bought Hill 16 2 years ago. He had looked like he was a nice young horse and hadn't progressed as he might have done. And on his second race for us, he was second, beating a nose over these Grand National fences in a chase called the Beecher Chase in November, which is over 3 miles. He had a great season last year. He was fourth and second in big races. The plan was always to run in the Grand National this year. He went back to Aintree in November again, and again jumped round well and finished really well. The ground wasn't quite soft enough for him, but he jumped really well and was sixth. And the plan then was to go to the Grand National, which duly happened on Saturday.
Yeah, and I mean, so you're talking here about an experienced horse, a good jumping horse, a horse that hadn't fallen before. I mean, it looked as though, when the first fence came up, that Hill 16 almost didn't see the fence.
Well, he definitely saw it because he took off too far away from it, and landed on top of it. And that was the problem. And because he landed on top of it, his momentum, he sort of cartwheeled over it and unfortunately broke his neck and died instantly.
And let's be honest, without that protest, we would have had the parade ring, there would have been the walk up on the course, there would have been a start. I mean, you believe that what happened ahead of that race directly contributed to the death of that great horse?
I do, and the other statistic to sort of support my view is that 9 years ago the course was changed hugely. The fences were changed completely, smaller, the ditches were taken out, the drops were taken out. And in those 9 years, there have been on average, less than 2 horses a year have fallen or been unseated at the first or second fence. This year, there was 8 horses. And that just shows, and going along with from people I've spoken to, that they felt there is no doubt that these horses and jockeys and officials, were just put under so much pressure by these so-called animal welfare, whatever you like to call them, advocates or whatever, animal rising, that this was the outcome. They will obviously deny it and say, a horse would have died. But, since in the last 9 years, there have been far fewer fatalities. Listen, we don't want any fatalities. That is the plan. And everybody is working very hard to reduce the numbers. But unfortunately, we will never reduce them completely.
No, that's right. But those numbers are pretty conclusive, aren't they, as you say? 2 a year on average, unseated or falling at the first 2, 8 this year. No, those numbers, I think, are pretty comprehensive. I think it's quite easy to say that animal rising directly contributed towards animal cruelty and death, the very opposite of what they said they would do. One thing I will say, Sandy, I thought the Merseyside police acted swiftly. They did a really, I mean, compared to, you know, here down south when people climb up onto gantries on the M25 or glue themselves to roads for hours, I thought the Merseyside police did a very, very good job of keeping that delay as limited as it was. But let me ask you, what does the sport do from here?
The sport continually is looking at itself to see, you know, how it can improve things. There will obviously be a review. There will be a number of options looked at. You know, it may be that they decide, if they look back and see number 36 to 40, have those horses been in the finish in recent years? And if they find that these horses are not getting near to winning a race, you know, perhaps it will be decided that they'll cut the numbers. They may also look at the start. The other problem, it's been a problem all their life, is trying to deal with loose horses. But obviously, when you lose eight horses at the first two fences, you suddenly have a lot more horses running loose. It's also been suggested that the jockeys maybe
absolutely. No, absolutely, but I get that totally. But I mean, surely, you know, all this talk of, you know, reducing the size perhaps of the field, of reducing the fences even more, I mean, that just makes horses go faster, and accidents are, some form of accident will always happen. I mean, isn't there a danger that the horse racing industry goes into appeasement mode and goes too far the other way?
No, the number of the size of the fences is not going to change, because if you make them any smaller,
okay,
horses will just go faster. So that is not going to change. Obviously, the number of horses is a difficult one. Nobody can tell you the answer. You know, will it just mean that it, you know, the horses at the back will just bunch up more, so there won't actually be any more room? We simply don't know the answer to that. But obviously, we're just continually looking at things. I'm not saying these are going to happen, but these are some of the things that they might that they might look at. They look at things every year. They're always in the British Horse Racing Association is always in contact with the RSPCA and horse welfare, World Horse Welfare, and discussing, you know, how we can make our sport safer. I mean, obviously, there's been huge controversy over the whip. You know, last year's winner actually would have been disqualified this year because the whip rules have changed. They've been changed hugely, and you know, if you strike a horse over 7 times, you know, you will be fined. If you go over 10, you'll be disqualified. So these are things that already we've taken on board, and we're always looking to see how we can improve things further.
Well, I have to say, Sandy Thomson, thank you for coming on and joining me, and I think you've given a very, very reasoned response to the animal rising guest I had on last week. I'm very sorry for what happened and wish you well. Thank you. Well,